My own family made my daughter, Laura, a stranger in her own home. Her sister Beth stood in my living room, pointed a trembling finger, and accused Laura of destroying her marriage. And we, her parents, just watched it happen. You probably think you know this story, but you don't know the half of it. My name is Frank, and I'm the father who stood by and did nothing. But this isn't just a story of my failure. It's the story of how my oldest daughter, Laura, faced a betrayal so deep it could crack stone and used her quiet strength to reveal a truth none of us wanted to see. It all started with a phone call. Beth, my younger daughter, called Laura in hysterics. "He's cheating on me, Laura. Mark is having an affair." Laura, being the good big sister she always was, didn't hesitate. Her voice was calm and strong. "I'm on the next flight out of Chicago, Beth. Just hold on. We'll get through this together." She hung up, already booking a ticket, thinking she was flying home to Ohio to comfort her little sister. She thought she was coming to help, but I knew what was really waiting for her. It wasn't a hug, it was a trap, and we had all helped set it. Laura walked into my house in Cleveland expecting to see her sister crying on the couch. Instead, she found a firing squad. The whole family was there. My wife, Sarah, her aunts, her cousins. No one was talking. The air was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Laura looked at me, her father, for some kind of comfort, but I just gave her a little nod. I couldn't even look her in the eye. She slowly walked over to her sister, her arms open. "Beth, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice soft with pity. But Beth didn't want a hug. She flinched back like she'd been touched by fire. The look on her face wasn't grief. It was ugly. It was pure anger. Laura stopped dead, her arms falling to her sides. The confusion on her face broke my heart. She was looking for an ally in a room full of enemies. Laura has always been the strong one, the protector. And Beth, my youngest, has always needed protecting. But in that moment, their roles were twisted into something terrible. The room was dead silent. Then Beth's voice, quiet but sharp, sliced through the air. "It's your fault," she whispered, her eyes locked on Laura. "This is all your fault." Laura just stared, completely stunned. "What are you talking about, Beth?" But Beth was already shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. She wasn't looking at her husband, Mark, the man who actually cheated. She was looking right at Laura. "Your job, your promotions, your perfect life." Beth's voice got louder with every word. "You were always showing off, making him feel like he was nothing. You drove him away." It was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard. But the worst part? The family believed her. My own wife, Sarah, wrapped an arm around Beth, nodding like it all made perfect sense. They had already decided Laura was the villain before she even stepped off the plane. Laura tried to defend herself. "I was just sharing my life with you, Beth. I thought you were proud of me." "Proud?" Beth scoffed. "You were suffocating him." In that moment, Laura became an outcast in her own family. And Mark, the snake at the center of it all, he just sat on the couch, staring at the floor, playing the part of the poor, broken man. He never said a single word, but I saw him glance up just for a second. He wasn't sad. He looked relieved. What on earth was he so relieved about? It was like watching a house of cards get built, but with memories instead of cards. Beth, my youngest, started pulling out moments from the past and twisting them into weapons. She brought up the time we all went out to a steakhouse in downtown Cleveland to celebrate Laura's big promotion to vice president. "Remember that night?" Beth sobbed, her voice dripping with fake pain. "You stood up and gave that speech about your ambition. Mark just sat there smiling. But I know you crushed him. You made him feel like a failure." Laura looked like she'd been slapped. "What?" "Beth, I was happy. I thought you were all happy for me." "Dad, you toasted to my success." I flinched because she was right. I did. I was so proud that day. But now my wife Sarah was shaking her head, looking at Laura with disappointment. Beth had been planting these poisonous seeds for years, and we'd been letting them grow. She was turning Laura's greatest moments into crimes. Every success, every achievement, was now being presented as a deliberate attack on her husband's pride. The whole time Laura was looking around the room, begging one of us, just one, to see the truth. But no one would meet her gaze. Why didn't any of us stand up for her? Finally, Laura turned to the man at the center of the storm. Mark, her brother-in-law, the one who actually had the affair. He was just sitting there, crumpled up on the couch like a kicked dog. "Mark," Laura said, her voice pleading, "tell them. Tell them this isn't true. Say something." He didn't move. He didn't even breathe, it seemed. He just kept his eyes glued to the worn-out carpet. It was a brilliant performance. He was playing the part of a man so ashamed and broken that he couldn't even speak. But it was a lie. His silence wasn't shame. It was a shield. He was letting Beth fight his battle, letting her build a wall of blame around Laura so he wouldn't have to face any of it himself. By saying nothing, he was agreeing with everything. He was letting my daughter take the fall for his own weakness. I watched him closely. I'm her father. I noticed things, and I saw a flicker of something in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. It wasn't guilt, it was relief. He was getting away with it, and in that moment, I knew he was more dangerous than Beth ever could be. Laura tried one last time, looking straight at me. Dad, you know this is crazy, right? My heart screamed to run over and protect my daughter, to tell everyone to get out of my house and to take their lies with them. But I looked at Beth sobbing into my wife's shoulder, and I failed. My voice came out quiet and weak. Laura, just let it be for now. Your sister is in pain. Those words hung in the air, and I saw the last bit of hope die in Laura's eyes. I had just passed sentence on her. We all had. She was guilty. She straightened up, her face a mask of cold calm. There were no tears. She just nodded once. A quick, sharp movement. I see, she said. It was the quietest I'd ever heard her voice. She walked to the front door, picked up her coat, and left without another word. The door clicked shut behind her. In the silence she left was heavy. My wife immediately started fussing over Beth, and the family closed ranks around them, a tight little circle of self-righteous comfort. They had their villain. They had their victims. And with Laura gone, what terrible truth were they all trying so desperately not to see? As Laura drove back to her empty hotel room that night, her mind went back in time. I know it did, because she told me about it much later. She remembered a hot summer day at a park right here in our Ohio town. She was about 12, and her sister Beth was maybe 7. Beth was climbing on the monkey bars trying to keep up with the bigger kids when she slipped and fell. I remember the sound of her crying from across the park. Before I could even get there, Laura was at her side. She had a scraped knee, bleeding and covered in dirt. Laura didn't panic. She just wiped the tears from Beth's face with the bottom of her t-shirt. It's okay, Bethy, she had whispered, hugging her little sister tight. I'm here. I'll always protect you. That was the promise between them. Laura was the protector, the strong one. Beth was the one who needed her. To have that same sister look at her with so much hate, to twist that love into something ugly, it was more than a betrayal. It was like erasing their entire life together. That promise, made on a sunny day in the park, was now just a ghost haunting her in a cold, dark car. How could a promise like that just vanish? The next morning, the attack continued, but it was silent now. Laura woke up and checked her phone, probably looking for an apology that would never come. Instead, she found she had been kicked out of the family group chat, the one we called Johnson Family News. 1 minute she was in, the next she was gone, erased with the tap of a button. It was my wife, her own mother, who had removed her. Then the private messages started. Texts from her aunts and cousins. They weren't angry, they were worse. They were full of phony, condescending advice. Her Aunt Carol wrote, "Honey, sometimes strong women need to learn to be a little smaller to make a man feel big. Just for a little while, to help Beth heal." They weren't just blaming her. They were trying to coach her on how to be less of herself. They want her to shrink, to apologize for her own success. Every message was another nail in the coffin, another voice telling her she was the problem. They weren't just kicking her out. They were trying to rebuild her from the ground up into someone they could be comfortable with. But what would be left of Laura if she let them? Laura felt completely alone, so she called the one person she thought she could trust, her best friend from high school, Amy. Amy had been friends with both of them. She was a nurse over at the Cleveland Clinic, a sensible person. Laura poured out the whole ugly story, expecting Amy to be shocked, to be on her side. But there was a long, terrible silence on the other end of the phone. Finally, Amy sighed. "Laura, I don't know how to tell you this," she said, her voice full of pity. "But Beth has been saying things like this for months, for almost a year, actually." Laura was stunned. "What do you mean?" "She would complain that your success was making Mark feel insecure," Amy explained. "That you were putting a strain on their marriage. I always thought she was just jealous and venting. I never, ever thought she'd take it this far." That's when it hit Laura like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a sudden, angry outburst. This wasn't about the affair at all. This was a story Beth had been writing for a very long time, and now my daughter was finally seeing just how deep the betrayal really went. After Laura hung up with her friend Amy, something inside her snapped. The hurt, the sadness, it was still there, but something new mixed in with it. It was a cold, quiet anger. She was sitting in her car in some lonely parking lot, the Cleveland skyline dark against the night. She finally understood. Her family, especially her sister Beth, didn't want the truth. They wanted a story that made them feel better, a story with a simple villain, and they had chosen her for the part. If they want to believe my success is a weapon, she later told me, she thought to herself, then I guess I have to show them how it's used. It wasn't about hurting them. Not really. It was about showing them the real villain they were so desperate to protect. She realized she couldn't fight their lies with words. They wouldn't listen. She had to fight them with the truth, but a truth so big and so loud that they wouldn't be able to ignore it. A plan started to form in her mind, not born from hate, but from a cold, hard need to set the record straight. She wasn't going to ruin their lives. She was going to force them to look at the one they had already ruined all by themselves. The moment Laura got back to her real life in Chicago, she was different. The messy, emotional world of our family in Ohio was behind her. She was back in her element, a glass office high above the city, where everything was clean and made sense. She didn't waste time crying. She made a phone call. The next day, a man in a sharp suit came to her office. He was a private investigator, but not the kind you see in movies. He was a corporate guy, the kind that digs into businesses. Laura was very clear in her instructions. I don't care about the affair, she told him, her voice steady. That's just a symptom. I want to know about his business, M-Tech Solutions. She wanted to know everything, every unpaid bill, every angry client, every loan. I need to know exactly how much trouble he's in, she said. The investigator just nodded and took his notes. Laura was no longer just defending herself. She was on the attack. She wasn't looking for dirt to sling at Mark, her brother-in-law. She was looking for something much more useful. She was looking for a crack in his armor. A week later, a thick manila envelope landed on Laura's desk. It was the investigator's report. She opened it, and the truth about Mark was laid bare, not in angry words, but in cold, hard numbers. His contracting company, M-Tech Solutions, wasn't just struggling. It was a sinking ship. He had lost his two biggest contracts. He was months behind on payments to his suppliers. The bank was about to call in a huge loan that he had no way of paying back. He was putting on a brave face for Beth and the family, pretending to be a successful small business owner. But it was all a lie. He was on the edge of bankruptcy, about to lose everything. Laura stared at the pages, at the columns of red ink that spelled out his failure. This was the secret Mark was protecting. This was why he let Beth blame her. It wasn't just to hide the affair. It was to hide the fact that he was a complete and total failure. He needed a scapegoat, and Laura's success made her the perfect target. She leaned back in her chair, the papers in her hand. This report wasn't just about his business. It was a map of his greatest fears, and she now knew the location of every single one. Laura's company was huge, with offices all over the world. One day, she was in a big meeting in a boardroom that looked over all of Chicago. On a giant screen was a map of the world, with a new red dot glowing in Asia. They were expanding, opening a brand new headquarters in a place called Singapore. They needed someone to run the whole operation out there, a new director of operations. As Laura listened to the presentation, I can just picture the gears turning in her head. They talked about the job, immense power, a salary that could change someone's life, and a 5-year contract. Then the presenter said the magic words. And of course, for the first 2 years, this is a mandatory solo relocation. It's too complicated with international taxes to move families right away. For anyone else in that room, it was just a business detail, a small problem. But for my daughter, Laura, it was the answer to a prayer she didn't even know she was praying. This project wasn't just a new office on the other side of the world. She realized it could be the perfect trap, custom built for a desperate man, a golden cage. And she knew exactly who to offer it to. Laura knew she couldn't pull this off alone. She needed help from someone inside her company, someone she could trust completely. So she went to her mentor, a man named David. He was an older guy on the company board, sharp as a tack, and he'd always looked out for Laura. He was more of a father to her in that moment than I had been. She met him for coffee at a small cafe, far from the office, and laid out the whole ugly family story. Then she told him her plan. She expected him to tell her she was crazy, that it was too risky. But David just took a slow sip of his coffee and looked at her with a kind of knowing sadness. He'd seen a lot in his years. "Laura," he said, his voice quiet, "in business, some people build bridges and some people burn them." He leaned forward. "But the smartest people know that sometimes you just have to expose that the bridge everyone was standing on was made of paper to begin with." He told her he would help. He'd make sure the paperwork for the job offer looked completely normal, that no one would question it. And just like that, Laura had an ally. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore. Before Laura could offer the job to Mark, her brother-in-law, she had to make him even more desperate. She needed him to feel like the walls were closing in, so that when she made her offer, it would feel like his only escape. So she did something cold and calculated. She used an anonymous email account to send a tip to a business reporter in Cleveland. She kept it vague, but specific enough that Mark would know it was about him. The email read, "You should look into how a once promising local contractor is about to go bankrupt. Seems he's been hiding his failure from his family and his lenders for a very long time." A few days later, a small article appeared on a local business website. It didn't use Mark's name, but it described his company's situation perfectly. The trap was now set. The bait was in the water. She had just lit a small fire under Mark's feet, and she knew he was the kind of man who would trample over anyone, including his own wife, to find the nearest exit. All she had to do now was wait for him to start running. A few days after the article about Mark's failing business came out, Laura's phone rang. It was her sister, Beth. Her voice was syrupy sweet, full of fake concern. "Hi, Laura," she said. "I was just calling to check on you. I heard a really nasty rumor that Mark's business was in trouble, and I just felt so awful." Laura stayed quiet, letting her talk. "I just think," Beth continued, "that all that stress is probably what made him, you know, act out. The poor guy has been under so much pressure." It was a jab, plain and simple. She was calling to twist the knife, to once again blame Laura's intimidating success for putting pressure on Mark and his failing business. She wanted to make sure Laura knew that, in her mind, this was also Laura's fault. But Laura didn't take the bait. The old Laura would have argued, would have defended herself. The new Laura was calm and cool. "That's a shame to hear," she said, her voice flat. "I'm sure Mark will figure it out." The line went quiet for a second. Beth was probably confused by the lack of a fight. Laura's coldness was more frightening than any argument, but Beth had no idea what was coming. That weekend, Laura met with her mentor, David, in an empty office building. They were putting the finishing touches on the job offer for Mark. It was the bait for their trap, and it had to be perfect. "Are you sure about this salary, Laura?" David asked, looking at the number on the paper. "This is more than we pay our senior guys. It's triple what he could ever make on his own." "It has to be," Laura replied, her voice firm. "The number has to be so big that it blinds him. It has to be an amount of money he can't say no to." They added more to the package. A luxury apartment in Singapore with a view of the ocean, a company car, a generous travel budget. It was a king's ransom. Then they wrote in the poison pill, the part that would seal the deal. In the fine print, under the heading Relocation Policy, they wrote the ironclad rule. "This position requires a solo relocation for the first 24 months. This clause is non-negotiable." It was a golden cage, and the door was only big enough for one person to fit through. Before she sent the email that would start it all, Laura did something I didn't expect. She took a drive. She went back to our old neighborhood, to the small blue house where she and Beth grew up. I remember the two of them as little girls, sitting on the porch swing, talking about what they wanted to be when they grew up. Beth always wanted exactly what she had: a nice house in a quiet town, a husband, a family. She wanted the white picket fence. Laura, my Laura, she always wanted more. She wanted to see the world from the top of a skyscraper. She wanted to build things. As she sat there looking at that little house, she realized something sad. In their own ways, they both got exactly what they dreamed of. But Beth couldn't stand it. She couldn't stand that while her dream was contained inside that white picket fence, Laura's dream was as big as the whole world. And that jealousy, that quiet, simmering jealousy, was the real reason for everything. It was the poison that had been killing their family from the inside for years. Back in her high-rise office in Chicago, with the city lights twinkling below, Laura wrote the email. It was short, professional, and cold. There was no hint of family, No mention of the fight. It was a clean, corporate message. To Mark Johnson. From Laura Johnson, Executive Vice President. Subject, an opportunity. The email was only a few lines long. It said that his name had come up regarding a potential executive role and that she would like to have a confidential meeting to discuss it. She was using her power, her success, the very thing they hated her for, as the lure. She read it over one last time, her finger hovering over the mouse. This was the point of no return. Once she hit send, the dominoes would start to fall, and she would have no idea where they would all land. It was a risk, a huge one. But the thought of her family, of the lies they all chose to believe, gave her the strength she needed. She took a deep breath and clicked the button. The email was gone, flying across the internet to her brother-in-law's computer. The trap was officially set. Laura didn't have to wait long. Less than an hour later, her phone buzzed. It was a reply from Mark. The man who had sat silently on my couch, playing the part of a broken victim, was suddenly very much alive. His email wasn't just interested, it was desperate. He wrote, "Absolutely, Laura. I'm very interested to hear more. I can make myself available anytime at all. Just let me know when and where." There it was, the confirmation of everything she suspected. He was a shark who smelled blood in the water, and he was ready to bite. He had no loyalty, no hesitation. All it took was the hint of an opportunity, and his act as the sad, wounded husband vanished. Laura wrote back, keeping her tone cool and professional. She suggested they meet in 2 days, at the bar of a fancy hotel in downtown Cleveland, a neutral place. A place where big deals were made and lives were changed. He agreed immediately. He had no idea he was agreeing to his own judgment day. He thought he was walking toward a lifeline. Did he ever suspect who was really throwing it? Laura got to the hotel bar first. It was one of those dark, expensive places with leather chairs and quiet music, a place of power. She picked a secluded booth in the back and ordered a glass of water. She was in her element. A few minutes later, Mark walked in. I can just picture him, trying to look like he belonged there. His suit was the best one he owned, but it was just a little worn at the cuffs. He was trying to project confidence, but he looked like a little boy playing dress-up. He saw Laura and walked over, sticking his hand out with a nervous smile. "Laura, good to see you," he said, trying to act like they were just two business acquaintances. "Mark," she replied, not smiling. She didn't shake his hand. She just gestured to the seat across from her. "Thanks for coming. Have a seat." He sat down, looking uncomfortable. The air between them was thick with everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. He was waiting for her to speak, to explain why she had summoned him there. He thought he was there for a job interview. He had no idea he was actually there for a character test. Laura didn't start with the job offer. She was smarter than that. She let Mark, her brother-in-law, squirm a little first. She leaned back in the booth, looking calm and in charge. "So Mark," she began, her voice even, "I saw that business article. Sounds like you're going through a tough time. I hope it's just rumors." This was his chance to be honest, to tell the truth. He didn't take it. He puffed up his chest and tried to look important. "It's nothing," he lied, waving his hand dismissively. "Just a slow quarter. Every business has them. We'll bounce back, stronger than ever." He was trying to save face, to pretend he was still a successful man. Laura just nodded slowly, letting him believe she was buying his story. She let him feel like he was in control of the conversation, that he was fooling her. It was a calculated move. She was giving him just enough rope, knowing that in a few minutes he would use it to hang himself. She let him build up his tower of lies one last time, just so she could enjoy the satisfaction of knocking it all down. After letting him finish his lies, Laura leaned forward and slid a sleek, black folder across the polished table. It landed with a soft, final sound. "This is why I asked you here, Mark," she said, her voice dropping to a serious tone. He looked at the folder, then at her, confused. He opened it. On the first page, in big bold letters, was a job title: Director of Operations, Singapore Division. I can just picture his eyes going wide. He was a small-time contractor from Ohio, and this was a title from another world. He turned the page. It listed the job responsibilities, the power he would have. Then his eyes found the number, the salary. It was a number so big it probably didn't look real. It was more money than he would have made in 10 years with his little company. The color drained from his face. All the fake confidence, all the bluster, it all just melted away. He looked up at Laura, his mouth slightly open. He was speechless. He was looking at a ticket out of his failed life, and he couldn't believe it was real. Laura let him stare at the numbers for a long moment, letting the shock sink in. Then she began to explain the role, her voice all business. She talked about the challenges, the expectations, and the immense rewards. He just nodded along, completely hypnotized by the money. Finally, she delivered the final, crucial blow, her voice sounding almost casual. "Of course," she said, "there is one condition. It's a company policy thing, very standard for these big international moves." Mark leaned in, listening intently. "Due to the sensitive nature of the project and some very complex tax laws," she explained smoothly, "this is a solo relocation contract for the first 2 years. It's a huge sacrifice, I know. A big commitment." She said the word sacrifice, but what she was really offering was an escape from his debts, an escape from his failure, and an escape from his wife, my daughter Beth. She laid the choice right in front of him, a golden new life or the broken one he already had. The offer was on the table. Now she would see what kind of man he truly was. Laura said she saw it happen right then, in the dim light of that hotel bar. For just a split second after she mentioned he'd have to go alone, the mask on Mark's face slipped. The look of the caring husband, the man who was worried about his wife, just vanished. And underneath, she saw his true face. It was the face of a man doing a quick, selfish calculation. His eyes weren't filled with sadness for Beth. They were filled with dollar signs. He tried to hide it. Of course, he cleared his throat and asked a few half-hearted questions. "So, Beth couldn't come, not even for a visit?" he asked, but his heart wasn't in it. It was the kind of question you ask because you know you're supposed to. Before Laura could even answer, he was already turning a page in the folder. "And this apartment," he said, his voice hungry, "it's fully furnished?" That was it. That was the moment of truth. He wasn't thinking about his wife, my daughter Beth, who was at home defending him and loving him. He was thinking about furniture. He was thinking about himself. The test was over, and he had failed spectacularly. Mark, feeling the power shift, tried to play the one card he thought he had left. He tried to make it personal, to remind her of their family connection. He leaned forward with a greasy smile, trying to act like they were on the same team. "Wow, Laura, this is incredible," he said, his voice low. "You're really doing this because we're family, aren't you? Helping me out after that whole misunderstanding." He called the destruction of my daughter's reputation a misunderstanding. The nerve of that man. Laura didn't even blink. Her face was like stone. She looked him right in the eye, and her voice was so cold it could have frozen the water in her glass. "Mark," she said, cutting him off, "let's be very clear. I am offering you this job because, on paper, you have the experience we need. This is a business decision. It has nothing to do with family." She took the word family and threw it right back in his face. She was telling him that the connection he had used as a shield was now completely gone. There would be no favors. There would be no sentiment. This was a transaction, nothing more. Laura glanced at her watch, a clear signal that the meeting was over. She had gotten what she came for. She had seen the truth of his character. "I'll need an answer within 48 hours, she said, her voice crisp and final as she stood up from the booth. "My assistant will email you the official contract. The offer is contingent on your signature and your presence in Singapore in 30 days. She looked down at him, a man so easily bought, a man willing to sell his entire life for a paycheck and an escape. "It's a life-changing opportunity, Mark," she said, her final words hanging in the air. "But everything has a price." And with that, she turned and walked away. She didn't look back. She left him sitting there all alone in the fancy bar, with the black folder open on the table in front of him. In that folder were two futures, one with a fortune on the other side of the world, and one with a wife he had already betrayed. He had 48 hours to decide which one he wanted more. That very evening, as Laura was waiting for Mark's decision, her mother called. My wife, Sarah. She had no idea what Laura had just done. She was still deep inside the family fairy tale. "Laura, I was just talking with Beth," my wife started, her voice full of disappointment. "She's trying so hard to forgive Mark and keep her little family together. It's what a wife is supposed to do." Laura just listened, her hand tight on the phone. "I don't understand why you have to be so difficult," Sarah went on, her voice getting sharper. "When are you going to apologize for the mess you made? When are you going to help them heal?" The irony was so thick, it was suffocating. Here was my wife, begging Laura to apologize to the man she was secretly offering a golden escape route to, a route that would destroy Beth's marriage for good. Laura didn't argue. She just said in a calm, quiet voice, "Mom, I have a feeling everything is going to become much clearer for everyone very soon." Then she hung up, leaving my wife staring at the phone in confusion. The next 48 hours were the hardest part for Laura. She sat in her big, quiet apartment in Chicago, watching the clock tick. She was sure she knew Mark's character. She was sure he was selfish, weak, and greedy. She had bet her entire plan on it. But what if she was wrong? I know a small part of my daughter, the part that still remembered being a big sister, was hoping he'd say no. For Beth's sake, what if he had a moment of clarity? What if he actually loved Beth enough to turn down a fortune and stay to fix the mess he made? If he said no, her plan would fail, but maybe her sister's marriage would have a sliver of a chance. Her entire plan for revealing the truth hinged on Mark being exactly the man she thought he was, a coward. The minutes crawled by like hours. She paced her floor. She stared out at the city lights. She waited. Then, just as the 48-hour deadline was about to expire, her laptop made a small sound. A single ding. A new email had arrived. The sound of that notification echoed in the quiet apartment. Laura walked over to her laptop, her heart pounding in her chest. There it was on the screen. A new message. The sender's name was lit up in bold letters. Mark Johnson. This was it. The moment of truth. Everything she had done for the past month, the investigator, the sleepless nights, the cold calculations, it all came down to this. In that email was the answer. It held the truth about Mark, the truth about her sister's marriage, and the truth about the lie our whole family had chosen to believe. She took a deep breath, her hand trembling just a little as she moved the mouse. Her finger hovered over the screen, over the unopened message. The subject line was simple, a direct reply to her original email. It just said, an opportunity. She closed her eyes for a second, then she clicked. What would it say? Laura clicked open the email. It was short, it was professional, and it was exactly what she expected. Mark, her brother-in-law, formally accepted the position. He expressed his deep gratitude for the opportunity of a lifetime. He confirmed that he understood all the terms of the contract, including the 30-day start date and all the relocation requirements. The most important part of the email, though, was what it didn't say. There was not one single mention of his wife, not one word about Beth, no questions about how this would affect her, no hesitation. He had been given a choice between his marriage and a pile of money, and he didn't even blink. I know my daughter. She didn't feel happy in that moment. There was no joy in being right about something so ugly. She just felt a heavy, cold certainty. The man her sister loved and defended, the man our family had protected, was a complete fraud. He was willing to sell his wife and his life for a job on the other side of the world. The trap had been set, and the animal had walked right into it without a second thought. Now, I wasn't there for this next part, but I heard all about it later. That night, Mark sat my daughter Beth down on their living room couch in Cleveland. He had the signed contract in his briefcase, a secret grenade. He looked at her with his sad, serious eyes and told her a beautiful, terrible lie. He didn't mention Laura. He didn't mention the solo relocation contract. No. He told Beth that his company had been headhunted for a massive international project. He said it was an exclusive partnership, a once-in-a-lifetime chance to save their finances and secure their future. I have to go, honey, he said, taking her hands in his. This project in Singapore, it's only for a little while. I have to do this for us. It's the only way. He wasn't just leaving her. He was pretending he was doing it as a noble sacrifice. He was a coward running away from his life, but he was painting himself as a hero going off to war for her. It was the most twisted, manipulative lie I had ever heard of. And Beth, my poor, foolish daughter Beth, she believed every single word. She had been defending him for so long that she couldn't see the truth, even when it was sitting right in front of her. She started to cry, but her tears weren't of anger or suspicion. They were tears of pride. "Oh, Mark," she sobbed, hugging him tightly. "You are so brave. To go all that way, all alone, just for our family. I'm so proud of you." She saw him as a hero, a martyr sacrificing himself for their future. She was completely blind. The lie he told was exactly what she wanted to hear, that he was a good man, a strong man, a man fighting for her. She pulled away from him, her face glowing with a tragic kind of joy. "I have to call Mom," she said, already reaching for her phone. "Everyone in the family needs to hear about this. They need to know what a wonderful, selfless man you are." And just like that, she became his greatest cheerleader, telling everyone the lie that would soon lead to her own public humiliation. Just like Beth promised, the news of Mark's heroic sacrifice spread through our family like a wildfire. My wife, Sarah, got off the phone with Beth and came to me with tears in her eyes. "Frank, you won't believe it. Mark got a huge international contract. He's moving to Singapore to save their finances." "What a man!" The family group chat, the one Laura had been kicked out of, lit up with messages. "Beth is so lucky to have a man who would do that for her," one cousin wrote. "A true provider. They don't make men like that anymore," her aunt typed. They were building him a throne out of their own ignorance. Every message of praise was another brick. They were celebrating the very man who was about to shatter my younger daughter's world. Laura didn't have to imagine what they were saying. Her Aunt Carol sent her a private text message that afternoon. It was a picture of Beth and Mark smiling. The message underneath was a dagger. It read, "See? This is what a real man does. He sacrifices for his family. Maybe you could learn a thing or two from him." The next day, my wife called Laura. She didn't call to build a bridge. She called to burn one. "Laura, I'm sure you heard the news about Mark," she started, her voice cold and hard. "He's moving halfway across the world, leaving everything behind to provide for your sister." Laura said nothing. She just listened to the venom coming through the phone. "I just hope you're watching," my wife continued. "I hope you see what real love and sacrifice look like. It's not about fancy titles and big promotions, Laura. It's about putting other people first." The cruelty was breathtaking. She was using a beautiful lie about Mark to punish Laura for telling an ugly truth. Laura's voice was quiet when she finally spoke. "I understand, Mom." That calm reply seemed to make my wife even angrier. "I doubt you do," she snapped. "One day you'll be old and all alone with your money, and you'll realize what you've thrown away." Then she hung up, leaving Laura standing in the ruins of what was once their family. Mark had less than 30 days before he had to be in Singapore. A man who was supposedly making a temporary sacrifice for his family would be careful, right? He'd put his things in storage. He'd make plans for his return. Mark did the opposite. He was a man in a hurry, a man escaping. Beth thought he was just being efficient. She would tell us, "He's selling his old work truck to have extra money for us while he's gone." But I saw him. He wasn't just selling his truck. He was selling everything. His tools, his office furniture, all the equipment from his failed business. He was selling it all for pennies on the dollar on Facebook Marketplace. He wasn't storing his life. He was liquidating it. He was cutting every single tie that bound him to Ohio. Beth saw a hero preparing for a mission, but I was starting to see a prisoner digging an escape tunnel. What was he so desperate to get away from? While Mark was in Ohio, frantically selling off his past, Laura was in Chicago, calmly building his future. She was the invisible architect of his new life. She was on conference calls with the relocation team in Singapore, making decisions he knew nothing about. "Yes, the apartment with the full view of the marina," she'd say, her voice calm and clear. "And please make sure the bar is stocked. He likes the expensive kind of scotch." She knew his favorite brand from years of family Christmases. She was using these little intimate details to build his perfect cage. She approved the lease on a luxury car for him and set up his new bank accounts. Every move she made was designed to make his new life perfect, to make it shine so brightly that he would never look back at the rubble of the life he was leaving behind. The relocation agent asked her once, "Do we need to make any arrangements for his wife's eventual visit?" Laura's reply was ice cold. "Your only focus is the 24-month solo contract, nothing else." She was building a paradise for one, and there was no room for her sister. Not everyone in the family was completely blind. My nephew Jake, a young guy who works as a mechanic, has always been a little sharper than the rest. He saw things people wanted to ignore. He pulled me aside one afternoon when I was in my garage. "Uncle Frank," he said, wiping some grease off his hands with a rag, "can I ask you something? Does this whole Mark thing seem weird to you?" I just grunted, not wanting to get into it. "It's just," he continued, "the guy is acting like he won the lottery. I saw him the other day, and he was whistling. He doesn't look like a dude who's heartbroken about leaving his wife for 2 years. He looks like a guy who just got out of jail." His words hit me hard because he was right. I had seen it too. The relief on Mark's face, the excitement. But I had pushed it down, not wanting to upset my wife and Beth. Jake looked at me, waiting for me to agree to say something. But I just shrugged, and in my silence I failed again. But a seed of doubt had been planted. Was I the only one who felt it? While my nephew Jake was seeing the cracks in the story, my daughter Beth was busy building it into a monument. Her faith in her husband Mark was at an all-time high. To prove it, she decided to throw him a big, surprise, see you soon party. She was so excited. She spent days on the phone with her mother and her aunts, planning every little detail. She ordered a cake that said, "Our hero's next adventure." She made a playlist of all his favorite songs. "We have to show him how much we love and support him," she'd say to anyone who would listen. "His sacrifice is for all of us." She was pouring all her love, all her hope, into this one big event. She was planning a celebration of her own abandonment. I watched her address the invitations, her handwriting full of happy little loops. Each one she sealed was another nail in her own coffin. She dropped the thick stack of envelopes into the mailbox, each one a ticket for our friends and family to come witness her heart get broken. The surprise party was held in my backyard in Cleveland. It was a monument to our family's ignorance. Beth had hung a big banner that said, "Go get him, hero," and the cake had a picture of an airplane on it. Everyone was there, laughing, eating, and slapping Mark on the back. They toasted his bravery, his sacrifice, his love for his family. And Laura was there. My wife, Sarah, had guilted her into coming. "It's the least you can do, Laura. Show some support." So she stood by herself in a corner of the yard watching the whole circus. She was like a ghost at her own funeral. Family members would walk past and give her these sad, pitying looks, as if to say, "See, this is what a real family looks like." They saw a selfless hero in Mark and a selfish daughter in Laura. They were celebrating the man who was abandoning my daughter, while shunning the daughter who was about to expose him. The hypocrisy of it all was so thick you could choke on it. At some point during the party, I saw Laura standing alone by the garage, and I walked over. I thought I needed to teach my daughter a lesson. I was so blind. My voice was full of fatherly disappointment. "Laura, I hope you're paying attention to this," I said, gesturing to where Mark was laughing with his cousins. "This is what a man does. He steps up. He makes sacrifices for his family when times are tough." I looked at her, expecting her to argue, to get angry, but she didn't. She just looked back at me, her face calm, her eyes holding a deep sadness that I didn't understand. "Maybe you can learn something from him about what's really important," I finished, feeling like I had done my duty as a father. She just gave a single, slow nod. She didn't say a word. That silence, that calm, knowing look, it was more powerful than any scream. She knew the truth, and she knew that soon I would too. And I would have to eat every single one of my foolish words. Later that evening, as the party was winding down, Laura went inside to the kitchen to get a glass of water. Mark, her brother-in-law, followed her in. He was a little drunk, full of himself from all the praise. He cornered her by the sink, leaning in close so no one could hear. "Hey," he whispered, a smug grin on his face. "I just wanted to say thanks for everything." Laura just stared at him, her face unreadable. "No, really," he continued, his voice low and conspiratorial. "You totally saved me. I really, really owe you one." He said it so casually, like she had just helped him change a flat tire. There was no shame, no guilt, no remorse for what he was doing to her sister Beth. In his mind, this was just a business deal. She was his get-out-of-jail-free card. He wasn't just a weak man who had made a mistake. He was a black hole of selfishness. He was rotten all the way to the core, and he had just admitted it to her face. The night before Mark was set to leave, my daughter Beth was on her phone, her face glowing from the screen and her own pride. She posted a picture of her and Mark on social media, the two of them smiling, locked in an embrace. She wrote a long, gushing caption underneath it. I remember her showing it to my wife. "Look, Mom, isn't that perfect?" The caption read, "Here's to my hero husband, who is moving across the world to provide for his family. Every day we are apart will be a testament to his love and sacrifice. I'm the luckiest woman in the world, counting down the days until we are reunited." The post was immediately flooded with likes and comments from our family and friends, all of them praising Mark. "What a man. You're so blessed, Beth." Miles away in Chicago, Laura saw the post. She didn't comment. She didn't click like. She just took a screenshot, saving the public declaration of the lie. It was the final piece of evidence she needed, a perfect picture of her sister's blind faith, captured forever before the whole world. The next day, we all drove Mark to the airport. My wife, Beth, and I stood with him at the security gate. It was the final scene of his great performance. Beth was crying, holding onto his arm like she'd never let go. "I'll miss you every second," she whispered into his chest. Mark played his part perfectly. He held her face in his hands, his expression full of fake sorrow. "This is the hardest thing I've ever had to do," he lied. "But it's for you, Beth, for our future. I'll call you the moment my plane lands." He gave my wife a hug. He looked me in the eye and gave me a firm, man-to-man handshake, like the responsible son-in-law he was pretending to be. Then they called his flight for final boarding. He gave Beth one last long kiss, turned, and walked toward the gate. Just before he disappeared down the jet bridge, he turned back and gave us all one final brave wave. A soldier going off to war, a hero on his noble quest. We were in the car on the way home from the airport. My wife was crying quietly in the passenger seat, and Beth was staring out the window, lost in her sadness. The car was silent, heavy with grief. Then suddenly, all of our phones buzzed at the exact same time. It was a strange, jarring sound. I pulled over to the side of the road. We all looked at our screens. It was an email from my daughter, Laura. The subject line just said, "Something you need to see." My hands were shaking a little as I opened it. It was a scanned document, a formal letter on her company's letterhead. It was the official job offer she had given Mark. My eyes scanned the page. I saw his name, the title, and then I saw the salary. The number was so big it made me gasp. Then I saw a sentence, highlighted in bright, glaring yellow. "This position is a mandatory solo relocation contract for a period of 24 months. Before I could even figure out what it meant, before I could look at Beth's face, my phone buzzed again. A second email from Laura had arrived. My finger trembled as I opened the second email from Laura. It was simple. It was a forward of the email Mark had sent to her. My wife and Beth were reading the same thing on their own phones. I read the words out loud in a shaky voice. "Dear Laura, after careful consideration, I am thrilled to formally accept the position. I understand and agree to all the terms outlined." His words were so eager, so professional. There was no mention of his wife, no sadness, just pure, selfish excitement. The lie was exposed. The truth was out. And then there was nothing. We just sat there in the car on the shoulder of the highway, with traffic rushing past us like a river. But inside our car, there was a dead, heavy silence. It was the loudest silence I have ever heard. It was the sound of a story shattering. It was the sound of a family breaking. I looked at my wife, Sarah. Her face was as white as a ghost. I glanced in the rearview mirror. My daughter, Beth, was just staring at her phone, her face completely blank, like the screen had burned the truth right onto her soul. The silence in the car was finally broken by my wife fumbling with her phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely dial the number. She called Laura. She put the phone on speaker, her last desperate hope that this was all some kind of terrible mistake. "Laura," my wife whispered, her voice cracking. "Laura, what is this? What did you do?" Laura's voice came through the speaker, and it wasn't angry or triumphant. It was just calm, so terribly calm. "I didn't do anything, Mom," she said, her voice even. "I offered a desperate man a job. He had a choice. He could have stayed. He could have tried to fix his marriage and his business. Or he could take the money and run." There was a pause. "He chose to run," Laura finished. The simple, brutal honesty of it sucked all the air out of the car. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. And Mark had made his. From the back seat came a small, choked gasp. It was the first sound Beth had made. That little gasp from Beth turned into a sob, and then another. The blank look on her face crumbled, replaced by pure, raw agony. The truth was hitting her, like a series of punches to the gut. The secret job offer. The staggering salary he never told her about. The solo relocation clause. It was all a lie. "The party," she whispered, her voice full of horror. "Oh my God, the party." She was thinking about the banner that called him a hero. She was thinking about the cake. She was thinking about her social media post, the one where she called him her brave, sacrificing husband for the whole world to see. It wasn't just that her heart was broken. It was that she had been made a fool of. The man she had defended, the man she had sacrificed her own sister for, had just publicly and privately abandoned her for a paycheck. He hadn't just left her, he had used her as a shield on his way out the door. She was left all alone on the side of the road, with nothing but the smoking ruins of the lie she had helped build. We drove the rest of the way home from the airport in that terrible silence. But when we walked in the door, the phone started ringing. It was aunts, uncles, cousins. Laura had sent the emails to the entire family, the story they had all believed in. The one where Mark was the poor victim and Laura was the big bad villain had been blown to pieces. With Mark exposed as a liar and a runaway, their anger had nowhere to go. They couldn't blame Laura anymore. Her success didn't make him sign that contract. Her ambition didn't make him lie to his wife. All his choices were his own. Suddenly, all that blame and judgment had to turn around. It was pointing back at them, back at us. They were forced to see that they had protected a con man, they had attacked an innocent woman, and they had done it all because the lie was more comfortable than the truth. The scapegoat was gone, and now they were left to stare at their own foolishness in the mirror. How could they ever face Laura again? That night I couldn't sleep. I just sat in my old armchair in the den, the house dark and quiet. I felt the full weight of my failure. I was a father who had watched one daughter get torn apart by the family and had done nothing to stop it. I was a coward. I knew I had to do something, even if it was too little, too late. With trembling hands, I picked up the phone and called Laura. She answered on the second ring, her voice cautious. Hello? It was the hardest phone call I've ever had to make. My voice came out choked and raspy. Laura, it's Dad, I started. Listen, there are no excuses for what we did, for what I did. We were wrong. I was wrong to not stand up for you. I am so sorry. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I thought she had hung up. I wouldn't have blamed her. But then I heard her take a quiet breath. Her voice was soft, without anger. Thank you for saying that, Dad, was all she said. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. And what about Mark, the man who started it all? He got exactly what he wanted. He was in Singapore in his beautiful, expensive apartment with a breathtaking view. He was the new director of operations, a powerful man with a huge salary. He had escaped his debts, escaped his failing business, and escaped his marriage. He had won. But from what we learned later, it was a hollow victory. He was surrounded by strangers in a country where he didn't know the culture. He had all the money in the world, but no one to spend it on. He ate his fancy meals alone. He came home to an empty apartment. He was living in a golden cage that he had chosen for himself. One night, feeling lonely and pathetic, he sat down and wrote a long, rambling email to Beth. It was full of weak excuses and self-pity. He said he missed her, that he did it all for her. But was he sorry for what he did, or was he just sorry he was all alone? About a month after Mark left, Laura came back to Cleveland. Things were still raw and quiet in our house. Beth was a ghost of herself, thin and pale. One afternoon, the two of them went for a walk, the first time they had been alone together since that awful day. I watched them from the window as they walked down our quiet suburban street. For a long time, they just walked in silence. Finally, as they were turning the corner, Beth stopped and turned to her sister. I found out later what she asked. Her voice was just a broken whisper. Why, Laura? Why did you do it like that? She wasn't yelling anymore. The fight was gone. She was just a person looking for an answer. Laura's reply was simple and honest. Because it was the only way, she said, her voice soft but firm. You wouldn't have listened to words. None of you would have. I had to show you the truth in a way that was impossible to ignore. The power between them had completely changed. For the first time, Beth was truly listening. They ended up at that little park, the one where Laura had made the promise to always protect her sister. They sat on an old wooden bench, and Beth finally told the whole truth. Not just about Mark, but about herself. I was always so jealous of you, she admitted, the words spilling out between sobs. Ever since we were kids, you were smart, you were ambitious. Every time you got a promotion or an award, I felt like I was shrinking. She looked at her hands, completely ashamed. When things with Mark started going bad, it was just easier to blame you. It was easier to believe that your success was the problem instead of admitting that my husband didn't love me enough or that I wasn't happy with my own life. It was the confession that had been buried under years of resentment. It was the real poison that had been leaking into our family. She hadn't just been lying about Mark. She had been lying to herself for a very long time. After she finally said it all out loud, It was like a fever broke in Beth. A little bit of the old fight came back into her eyes, but this time it was for herself. I deleted that email Mark sent, she told Laura, her voice a little stronger. And I called a divorce lawyer. The papers are being drawn up right now. She took a shaky breath. And I made an appointment to talk to someone, a therapist. It was the bravest thing I had ever heard my youngest daughter say. She was finally taking responsibility for her own life instead of letting it be defined by a husband or a sister. They didn't hug when they stood up to leave the park. It was still too soon, the wounds were too deep. But as they walked home, the huge, angry canyon between them had shrunk. It was still there, but it was just a crack now. A crack that maybe, just maybe, could be repaired. After the storm passed, our family was different. The old, easy way we used to be was gone forever. Sunday dinners at my house were quieter now. The conversations were more careful, more honest. We didn't just talk about good news anymore. We talked about real things. My wife, Sarah, was changed. She started to listen more. She looked at people, really looked at them, when they spoke. And the way the whole family looked at Laura was completely different. The fake pride they used to have for her success was gone. In its place was a new kind of respect. Maybe it was mixed with a little bit of fear, too. In a way, my daughter Laura had broken our family. But now I see that she had to. She had to break the fever of all the little lies and resentments we had been living with for years. She forced us to be honest, and it was a painful medicine. But it was the only thing that could have ever started to heal us. The family wasn't the same, but maybe, just maybe, it was finally becoming stronger. Months later, Laura was back in her office, looking out at the Chicago skyline. The whole ugly mess felt like a lifetime ago. She told me later that she didn't feel like a winner. In a war with your own family, there are no winners, there are only survivors. But she did feel something else. She felt free. For years, she had been carrying the weight of her sister's jealousy and her family's expectations. They had tried to make her feel guilty for her own light, for her own ambition. They tried to write a story about her where she was the villain, but she had refused to play the part. Her revenge wasn't about destroying Mark or punishing Beth. It was about liberation. It was about taking back the pen and writing her own story, in her own words. By forcing the truth out into the open, she had freed herself from the prison of their lies. That was the real victory, and it was a victory that brought her a quiet, steady peace she hadn't felt in years. One afternoon, a piece of mail arrived at Laura's office that was different from the usual business letters. It was a glossy postcard. The picture on the front was of the bright, futuristic skyline of Singapore at night, a picture of Mark's new kingdom. Laura turned it over. The back was almost completely blank. There were just 3 pathetic, scribbled words in the middle. "Hope you're well." There was no message, no apology, no signature, but she knew exactly who it was from. It was the ghost of her former brother-in-law, a weak little wave from across the ocean. The old Laura might have gotten angry. The old Laura might have felt a flash of pain. But this new, stronger Laura just looked at it for a moment. A meaningless piece of paper from a meaningless man. Then, without a single change in her expression, she walked over to the heavy-duty office shredder and dropped it in. The sound of the machine grinding the postcard into 1,000 tiny pieces was the last word on the subject. About a year after Mark left, Laura was in town visiting, and she met Beth for coffee. I saw them when they left. There were no tears, no big dramatic hugs. It was just quiet, peaceful. Beth looked better than she had in years. She told Laura about her new job. It wasn't a big, fancy career. She was working part-time at a local animal shelter. "It doesn't pay much," Beth said with a small, genuine smile. "But the dogs don't care how much money you make. They just care if you're kind." She was finally building a life on her own terms, finding worth in herself, not in a man or in comparison to her sister. They talked for an hour about simple things, the weather, a funny movie. They didn't talk about Mark. They didn't need to. He was a ghost from a past life that no longer had any power over them. The bond between them wasn't what it used to be. Maybe it never would be. But it was something new, something more honest. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like hope. Looking back on it all now, I finally understand what my daughter Laura did. At first, I thought it was a cold, calculated act of revenge, and maybe a small part of it was. But it was so much more than that. Her family had betrayed her and tried to paint her as a monster. So she used the very power they resented to hold up a giant mirror to us all. She didn't scream or fight. She just engineered a situation where the truth was the only possible outcome. She didn't ruin Beth's life. She ended a lie that was already ruining it. She gave her sister the painful, necessary gift of a fresh start. The best revenge I see now isn't about destroying your enemies. It's not about burning bridges. It's about revealing the truth so clearly that everyone is forced to see which bridges were made of stone and which ones were made of paper all along. She didn't cause the ruin, she just exposed it. Laura is still in Chicago, still the powerful executive. But she's different. She's lighter. The other day, her mentor, David, walked into her office with a new file, a playful look in his eye. "I hope you're not getting bored," he said, "because our biggest competitor just tried a nasty trick to steal a patent, and I have a feeling the man behind it has a few secrets he'd rather keep buried." Laura just smiled, a calm, confident smile. She took the file. She was ready for the next challenge, no longer a victim of anyone's story, but the author of her own. So now that you've heard the whole story from a father who watched it all happen, I have to ask you a direct question. Was my daughter Laura a hero or a villain for what she did? Tell me your honest answer in the comments below. I want to know if you think she went too far, or if it was the only way to force a family to finally face the truth. If you believe that sometimes the truth, no matter how painful, is the only thing that can set you free, then like this story and subscribe. Let's send a message that stories about quiet strength and undeniable truth are the ones that truly deserve to be heard.